We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I am here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I really must be getting old, Tom, because I actually felt cold yesterday. Granted, it was 2 degrees outside, and I have never turned the heat on in my apartment once since I've lived here. But I actually felt cold, which is highly unusual for me. I think I put on a pair of pants and a sweater. Didn't even know I owned a sweater, but I did.
Celsius?
Celsius, yes.
I mean,
I closed the window, Tom. Can you believe it? I closed my window.
it warmed back up here. So it was like 68 when I woke up this morning, which is, I don't know, like 20 or something there, maybe 19 around that vicinity.
That's much too warm for December.
Well, the thing is, it's like the weekends here have been. This is why people move to Florida.
Yeah, right.
That and all the free COVID that you can get, but my wife and I have been like making excuses. We're like, we're gonna go shopping. Who wants to go with us? And the kids are like, oh, I don't want to go. I want to go. Okay. So we go shopping, and then we end up at a restaurant where we sit outside and have drinks and eat some tapas. It's been, but it's been beautiful. It's been absolutely gorgeous here the last couple of weeks. Foggy in the morning, which is unusual, but then it burns off, and it's just amazing. So. I was cold for a little bit, but like I said, it is Florida, so we've got about 2 weeks
Dipped
where
below
I was
30,
like,
so he's like, oh, shivery.
Oh, it wasn't below 30. No, it wasn't that low.
No, 30 Celsius.
Oh, Celsius, yes. Okay. No, it was 48 Fahrenheit, and I was like, when I went out cycling, because I'm one of those guys, I put on like everything I owned. Like I had to put it all on.
Oh my goodness.
Because I don't have cold weather gear because it's literally useless 99.9. Like there's one day a year, maybe 2 days a year where you're like, ooh, I could actually use this. Because I actually ordered a winter like felt lined cycling jacket.
Cow.
And I thought it was like,
if I were doing the exercise of actually like cycling for real, I don't think I could wear little enough. I'd just be.
Well, there were still people when I was bundled up and complaining about my feet being cold. There was people out there, and all they were wearing was short sleeve jerseys, short sleeve shorts, and then they had special sandals that had the cleats on the bottom where they could click in, and they had sandals on.
Like double digit in Celsius. That's warm. But yeah. When I felt a little chilly, I warmed up by playing Mario Party Superstars, which is the newest version, and it's excellent. I love that game. That's my speed for online gaming now. That's what I need.
What is that?
It's Mario Party, but you can actually play it online with random people without having to put in a friend code for the first time in ever with Nintendo. So it's fantastic. I love that game. It's very, very fun. And since I absolutely cannot compete in first-person shooters or racing games anymore because my reflexes just aren't there, I can still mash on a button, and that's what Mario Party is about.
What system is that for?
Switch.
Oh, maybe I'll get that for my son.
Oh, it's fantastic. Come play.
Mario Party
Superstars.
Okay, you're going to have to text me that later.
Okay. Because there is Super Mario Party on Switch that came out earlier, which is not the same thing. And I mean, that one's okay, but it's not as good. Superstars is good.
Okay. I will say for all of you that are listening to this podcast and wondering what the extraneous noises are almost certainly going to be, it is my 18-year-old son. This week is finals week, and at their schools around, like this wasn't the way when I was a kid. Like you went to school no matter what, but here you can kind of organize your finals so that they land on certain days, and some finals you can opt out of if you have a good enough grade. So he's done that, so he didn't have to go to school today. So he's home working on a midterm or something. I don't know what he's doing. But I told him to be quiet, which almost certainly will be completely forgotten.
Okay.
And I have the door open because it's hot. Yeah. Actual hot, not Rob hot.
That's right.
Actually warm. And I'm still hot from cycling, so I did go cycling this morning. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We have a website. Can you guess what it is? Is it avrant.com? It is. Oh, you're so smart.
Yep.
Our listeners are the smartest
Context
listeners.
clues.
I think that's how we're supposed to get more listeners, is telling our listeners how smart they are. Our listeners are the best listeners. They're better than all other audio home theater type people. And I kind of believe that's true. For the most part, we get questions that are like not completely inane, and
well,
I
and
mean
it's also
that,
the ones where they're like, this has been bugging me for a long time, and nobody else online is answering it to a satisfactory degree. So let's acquiesce and go ask Tom and Rob.
I will be honest with you. Like I was on Reddit this morning before I went cycling, just scrolling through, and I was like, "This is a question for AVRant. This is a question for AVRant. This is also a question for AVRant because it's very specific, and it's very specific. It's unique to you, and every answer you're getting is wrong.
Right.
And not like completely wrong, but like mostly wrong. Like somebody was having a problem with their audio or whatever, and I'm looking at the setup, and I'm like, you haven't given us enough information. By the way, I did write that article about how to get your questions answered.
Okay.
It completely got away from me, which means it's way too long, way too specific.
It didn't just say, come ask AVRant. That could have been the entirety of the article.
That could be the entirety. But the thing is, it was supposed to be how to ask a question so that you get the answer that you want. Yeah. You know, I don't know how many times anyway, so I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's not enough information here, but from what I can see, I can probably infer that your problem was X, Y, and Z, and none of the answers were that. Like none of even included parts of that. They're like, you need to clean up your wiring. I'm like, that may be true, but you know, probably not the problem. All right, let me see. AVRant.com. You can go Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. You can look us up there. YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our live video. This thing right here, you can see our faces, which you're hearing right now. You can see our how's the lip sync these days, Rob?
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. It's pretty decent. I haven't had to do very much chopping at all. And the chapters over there are a very handy feature on YouTube, because if you want to skip around very quickly, they are labeled, and you can easily skip to whatever chapter. The timestamps are in the show notes, so it works out very nicely. I will say, after almost 2 years of wearing a mask, I have completely lost any ability, which I did not have much to begin with, of controlling my facial reactions to people saying very, very, very stupid things. So when we're sitting here, and you can literally see what I'm thinking across my face, because I have no ability to control it whatsoever. Like from my eye holes up, I got a little bit. But do you
my
now?
mouth,
there's a whole lot of frowning that goes on with Tom's eyebrows.
Well, the frowning's below. The frowning's down here. Up here, it could be. I mostly scowl anyway, so it kind of blends in. But the frowning's below. If you blocked out the lower part here, I don't know that you would. Anyways, so if you want to see Tom visually react to everything Rob says, this is the place to do it. If you want to contact us directly, it's rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. I'm going to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. You support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is by going to patreon.com/avrantpodcast and sign up to be a contributing, subscribing, listening personage.
Money person.
Yes. Every month, just like you were paying us a very low under the table salary, Patreon will take some money from you and give most of it to us as a minimum of $1. So we want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com, including Mel. So thank you to our patrons.
Yes, indeed. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, and a big thank you to our 137 patrons. Mel, thank you for being one of them.
Yeah, that's right. If you can't support us financially, just do something to support us and let us know what it is so we can mention you. So Mitch bought some SVS products during their Black Friday sale. And oh my God, how many questions on Reddit were, what's the difference between the regular and the pro? And everybody's like, it's an app. Okay, but is it worth it? I don't know how much you're going to use the app. It's pretty much the difference. Black Friday sale, he checked the AVRant podcast box in their where did you hear about SVS section to let them know it was thanks to us. That's when I knew we had actually made it with SVS.
Yeah.
is when they gave us a box, and they're like, we're tired of people calling us and telling us about it. We'll just give them a box so we don't have to field these phone calls anymore. So
That's
thank
great.
you,
Thank
Mitch.
you, Mitch. That's awesome. Thank you.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. We've got Keshaun, who gave us a pronunciation because I'm sure we messed that up. Keshaun says he's always impressed with how patient, knowledgeable, and thorough we are. My kids would take umbrage with the patience part of that. Daddy doesn't let them finish their sentences most of the time before he starts
I
chastising
think compared
them.
to a lot of the forum answers, we are pretty darn nice on this podcast, so I'll take it.
There is a chance you'll get a little bit of good-natured ribbing from me.
Sure. And me too sometimes.
Sometimes. I mean, you're Canadian, so who could even tell when
But
it was
compared
raining?
to just calling you stupid and saying use the search, we're better than that.
Better than that.
we
Setting the bar nice and low.
That's
We
right.
just stepped right over it. Didn't even hardly lift our foot. It was more of a gutter that we walked across than anything. All right. So he shared our video in the Home Theater for Everyone Facebook page a few times to help answer people's questions.
nice.
That's good. So Keshaun, Mitch, Mel, Lars, and Junior all sent notes of gratitude. So thank you to all of you for thanking
Yes,
us.
indeed. Keshaun, Mitch, Mel, Lars, and Junior, thank you all very much for those notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are definitely appreciated. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news here, we got this from Nelson, though I saw it as well. Go Google and Roku. I almost said Goku.
Yeah, that would be easy to do. That would make sense.
If they ever merge, they should name themselves Goku.
Right.
That would be awesome.
Who knows?
Their search results would be the Kamehameha. Kamehameha. Boom! There would be your results. It'd be worth it to wait for the animation every single time. Though he would take a long time yelling. Anyways, Google and Roku worked out their differences. They aren't sharing details about their new agreement, but one day before their contract was set to expire, they worked something out. And now the YouTube TV app is back in the Roku channel store, and you can continue to use the regular YouTube app and download its latest updates, including the ability to watch YouTube TV within the regular YouTube app if you want to. But just as that gets sorted, Carl let us know that Google informed YouTube TV customers that their contract with Disney is expiring on December 17th, and they haven't reached a new agreement yet. Yeah, if you think they had a hard time getting Roku and Google together, Disney's going to be like, I have a better idea. We'll buy you. How about that? So so Disney-owned TV channels might disappear from YouTube TV if they don't reach an agreement. So we'll see about that. But anyways, yes.
And
I think
we are, all the people who are like, oh, cord cutting. It's exactly the same as cable now. It is exactly the same as cable now. This is what happened with all of your cable companies and your direct TVs and all that. They got into these carrier agreements and the various mega corporations that own all the TV channels. They wanted more money and blah, blah, blah. And now it's exactly the same as just on the internet instead of via your cable company. So here we are. We've arrived back at the same place.
I mean, we talked about a la carte for so many years, and the thing that I warned about and you warned about and everybody else is like, okay, so the reason why you get all these extra channels is because they're using it as a way of reducing costs. But if you decide that you're only going to take the Discovery Channel and not the rest of that nonsense you don't want, then the Discovery Channel becomes a lot more expensive, and then everything else either goes away or gets bundled into something else, and that's exactly where we are right now. Yep. So my wife is like, I want to watch this movie. I'm like, yeah, that's on. Or what did she want to watch? Oh, she wants to see the new Jeopardy contestant. I guess there's some Jeopardy contestant that's making waves for some reason. I don't really know anything about it, but she wants to watch it, and I'm like, well, I think that's NBC. That's going to be Peacock, and she's like, and after having Peacock, she's like, ugh. I was like, exactly. So there's no chance of that. All right. Emotiva gave a heads up that they will need to increase their prices starting January 2nd, 2022. They have attempted to absorb the increased cost of materials and supply chain issues, but they do not have the margin to continue without a commensurate price increase, which is not exactly surprising.
Not surprising. In fact, congratulations to them for having held out this long, because pretty much nobody else did. But I mean, honestly, I can't fault them on that. That's perfectly justifiable, really, when your costs go up significantly, as they have for everyone across the board. Right. Then that's just going to happen. They're at some point going to have to raise their prices. So they've given warning. Fair enough. You've still got time. You can still put an order in right now if you're hearing this, if you're thinking of getting an Emotiva product, and I don't mind that's the case. So there you go. be in a rush.
Yeah. I mean, it is the holiday season. Treat yourself. This comes from Jorge and Eric and me, because I sent it to Rob as well. The relatively new TCL R546 and R646 series TVs, which dropped Roku in favor of Google TV, have been pulled from Best Buy. That was the exclusive retailer for these models. There have been widespread complaints from customers about the slow, buggy interface, failure to respond to button presses on the remote, and crashes that require resetting the TV to get it working again. So TCL has issued firmware updates already, but they haven't fixed the problem, so they've been pulled from the shelves and online, but they intend to have them back as quickly as possible once TCL gets the software issue sorted out and Emotiva rolls out the firmware updates. It'll be all sorted. So, you know.
I'm actually quite confident that TCL will get this sorted out. I mean, I'm not exactly
I'll be
sure
honest
why
with you.
this happened, but
TCL as a company is been interesting to me recently. I feel like they're trying to. They started off kind of, it has very much of that internet direct. This is my own personal. Feeling about them. They had this kind of internet direct speaker company feel to them, where they were like, we're going to sell at rock bottom prices and then slowly increase our capacity and ability, and then still sell as cheap as possible, but ramp up. And they seem to be wanting to go in that direction, and they seem to be wanting to do everything themselves rather than just buying panels from everybody else, which is what most people are doing, and they have to do to a certain extent, but they are definitely wanting to do, keep their own quality control and everything else, which I'm very interested. I wouldn't mind interviewing somebody from there, getting a little bit more of an insight into the company culture and like what they believe is their leadership, their goals, and their path forward and stuff like that.
All the big consumer Chinese brands, I mean, they've pretty much taken a similar tactic, because I mean, was TCL here before Hisense? I can't really remember, and I can't remember which one of them is number one in China and which one is number two, because they battle it out. TCL and Hisense.
I'll be honest with you, Hisense. I saw Hisense a lot when I was in Australia, but no TCL. And when I got back here, there was TCL, and I don't really
not so much Hisense.
Yeah,
but I mean, both of them took the tactic of coming in, undercutting on prices to get their name established a bit, and similar to like what Vizio did. Vizio is actually a North American company, but they came in at the low price points to begin with, but then over time have worked up to higher price points and better features and better quality and all that. And now Skyworth, the number 3 Chinese brand, they're trying to enter North America, and once again coming in with the lower prices to undercut everybody and cutting some of the features to get there. But over time they'll work their way up as well. So yeah, it's a similar tactic, but it seems to have worked quite well for a lot of companies, so it makes sense.
All right, so they finally decided to start selling replacement side panels for the PlayStation 5 in different colors. I saw this the other day and was so underwhelmed that I immediately forgot about it. Black and red will arrive in January. Blue, pink, and purple will follow in the first half of 2022, because just in time for Christmas. They'll cost $55 and be available for both the disc and the digital edition PS5 consoles. I've asked for nothing for Christmas from my family. I was like, I got a new bike for my birthday, and it was way more expensive than anything you guys are getting. So I'm just don't worry about me. But I did go online and I'm going to order Dune in 4K for myself. But it's not coming out until January. So again, I'm like, well, I guess I'm not getting it. If it was going to come out in time for Christmas, I would have bought it. But it's not coming out till January. It's like, thanks, guys.
Yes.
Nailed it.
So yes, Sony did sue out of existence the couple of companies that were selling their own versions of colored side panels.
Right.
The dark plates were around for the longest amount of time. I actually got a set of dark plates, so that was all right. I'm in there. Maybe I should sell them on eBay for $1 billion.
Well, I was going to say, just hold on to them for a little bit.
That's right.
And, just tell everybody that they make the video crisper or the audio better.
But there was
one with HDMI 2.1.
There was one other one that started really early as well, and they got sued out of existence. So anyway, here come the official ones, $55, and in 5 various colors besides white, which is still the default.
Some comments from listeners. Michael bought a couple of pairs of SVS Prime Elevation speakers. He intended to use one pair of surrounds and the pair as overheads for Atmos, but just for fun, he directly A/B compared them to his Ascend Sierra 2 front, left, and right speakers. He was kind of blown away. Their clarity and fidelity is pretty much on par. The Sierra 2 still delivered better delineation, but it wasn't nearly the difference he was expecting. He could easily envision people using Prime Elevations as front main speakers. He thinks they're up to the task, which means they kind of feel like overkill for Atmos, but no complaints for him. Yeah, if you look at their Prime satellites and you look at the Prime Elevations, you're like, it's just the same speaker.
Yeah, it's just in a different cabinet.
It's just the same speaker in a different cabinet. So that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast is, oh my God, how many Reddit questions are, do I need towers? And you see a picture of their room, and I'm like, you are 4 feet away from your TV. You do not need tower speakers. But I'm like, you could get away with satellite speakers, and not the little cubes, but a real satellite speaker like this or NHT that is, I mean, it's still kind of bookshelfy, but it's really small in comparison to what an actual full-size bookshelf would be. But they're surprisingly good. They really are.
And this is what we've talked about with that, when we said, once you get to that $500, especially $1,000 per pair price range, beyond that, we're definitely, we feel, into diminishing return territory where... Yeah, maybe there's little differences to be had, but it's not the same difference as going from, your TV speakers to $500 per pair speakers. Massive, huge difference where you're like completely worth the price increase. $1,500-ish for those Sierra 2s, you're not getting 3 times the performance of the Prime Elevations. That's just not what you're doing anymore.
Conversation about the Prime versus the Ultra, whatever it is.
And also... Like has been indicated in those new studies, the more speakers you're using, the even less you're able to discern it from your human perception. So yeah, I think we're definitely into the territory where you can use those speakers together and directly A/B comparing them. Maybe you'll hear some differences, maybe even blind you'd be able to tell them apart, but like Michael is just saying, closer than he thought it would be. And then when they're just being deployed as Atmos speakers, not going to be a problem for your matchup.
Right. Let's get the questions here. Steve the Geek from nextgenhometheater.com. I think we talked about last week that he was
if you would like to know, nextgenhometheater.com is a place where Steve keeps track of all of the Ultra HD Blu-ray releases and marks down which ones are in Atmos, which ones are in DTSX, which ones have IMAX enhanced, which ones like all the things that you want to know about them. He's got them in categories, so it's a great place to be able to keep track of your Ultra HD Blu-ray releases.
All right. So there's a new 77-inch LG C1 OLED in Steve's theater. He's got both the PS5 and Xbox Series X. Uh-oh. That is 2 things.
That's 2 things that actually that's one use more HDMI 2.1.
Then you can easily plug into one of these guys.
What question is coming?
So which AV receiver models can actually switch between more than one HDMI 2.1 device? Again, it would be preferable not to have to spend an extra $200 and also wait however months for Denon to deliver their 3-in-1 out switch. Yeah, so if you want Denon or Marantz and you want a higher end model, your only option is to for more than one device is to buy whatever their 2020 model is, have the board get the 3-in or 1-in 3 out or whatever it is, or 3-in 1 out.
3-in 1 out. Yeah. The $200 add-on, which there is however long a back order on right now. So that's exactly what he's trying to avoid. So if you want to Denon or Marantz and you want to be able to get that on board your receiver, you need to buy, what is it, the 760 or there's another one that you can get it's almost an entry level receiver. It can do like 7 channels and that's it. So you're very much limited in your Atmos ability. So if you want to have a higher end receiver that can do a little bit more, then you've got the 2 Onkyos or the 1 Onkyo, and then there's a couple of Yamahas that can do it. But not so much Yamaha. I wouldn't.
Oh, is it not Yamaha? I thought. Oh, you're right. Okay, I'm sorry. The Yamahas are all limited by their bandwidth to 24 gigabits per second.
They'll work for the PS5, but not for the Xbox Series X.
Right. Okay.
The Yamaha ones.
Right. That was off the noggin.
Yeah, so you actually, if you want to go with Denon, it is their entry-level models. The true entry-level S660H, which is 5 channels. It's 5 channels only. If that's all you need, great. It's got 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs and 1 HDMI 2.1 output, as well as 3 other HDMI inputs that are HDMI 2.0. But if all you need is 5 channels, you could do it with the Denon S660H. There is the S760H that Tom mentioned. That is 7 channels, and that is regular Mult-EQ, Odyssey Mult-EQ. And then the lone X series model that Denon has right now with 3 in, 1 out HDMI 2.1 switching is the X1700H. That is also 7 channels only, but compared to the S760H, you get Mult-EQ XT for Odyssey, so you get the XT version instead of the regular Mult-EQ version, and you also get Zone 2 pre-outs. So that's what you're paying extra for with the X1700H. Now, as Tom mentioned, if you want to go beyond 7 channels, then you need to start looking at Onkyo/Integra/Pioneer. I'm actually going to put up a chart on screen if you're looking on YouTube that has their entire lineup along with their prices there. But you're looking at the sort of more upper tier models if you want to get into this lineup. Really, the reason I'm saying that is because if you're going to do this, you still want good room correction, and to get good room correction, you've got to go to just the top 2 models in each of these, because those are the ones that have Dirac. Otherwise, you're stuck with Onkyo's basic AccuEQ, not even the updated version of AccuEQ that they had at one point, just the basic single point measurement version. And on the Pioneer side, you'd be with their MCACC. And again, I didn't even see them mention it being MCACC Pro. I just saw regular MCACC. So the ones I'm going to point you to for Onkyo, you'd be looking at the NR6100 has the switching, but that does not have Dirac, right? And that is 7 channels only. So that's where I'd probably go over to the X1700H from Denon instead, because it has the better room correction, and if you're going to be limited to 7 channels anyway. So again, looking at this chart, the sister models to that NR6100 from Onkyo are the Integra DRX 2.4 and the Pioneer VSX 935 and the Pioneer Elite LX105. Those are all sister models to each other. They all do not have Dirac, and they all stop at 7 channels. So if we go one rung up from that in each of these lineups, we'd be looking at Onkyo's NR7100 / Integra's DRX 3.4 / Pioneer Elite's LX305. Those are all the same receiver. They're all sister models from each other. The Pioneer uses Class D amplifiers.
Someone
That's the
needs
difference.
to kill one of these names. I know these names have been around for a long time,
Right.
but Integra, we have to say that Integra really is more of an installer brand.
Yes, and
you
the
don't
one
tend to buy those.
key difference in this comparison is the Integra DRX 3.4 does have a full set of pre-outs. The NR7100 does not. The LX305 from Pioneer Elite does not. If you want a full set of pre-outs, you've got to go with the Integra out of this middle tier series. Now, all of those have Dirac. All of those have 9 channels, and they are 9 channels only. There is no expanding them to 11. They stop at 9. Even the Integra, with its full set of pre-outs, the DRX 3.4,
Can't process anymore. Okay.
9 channels. That's where it stops. So if you want to go all the way to 11 channels with a receiver that has 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs and can actually switch between them, you've got to go to Onkyo's RZ50, and that's the least expensive one out of all these sister models, and it has all the features: Dirac, 11 channels, full pre-outs. So that's the one I would go for, is Onkyo's RZ50, but the sister models are Integra's DRX 5.4 and Pioneer Elite's LX505. There is a very weird discrepancy where the LX505 from Pioneer Elite only has a global crossover. You can't set independent crossover points for each of the speaker pairs. It has one global crossover and stops there for some completely inexplicable reason, even though it costs $100 more than the RZ50. So get the RZ50. That's basically the answer. But yeah, if you only need 7 channels, then Denon's X1700H will be a great choice. Did I lose you, Tom?
No. You did, because I'm thinking about this global crossover. But there's a big part of me that's like, okay, yes, you should definitely get the RZ50. There's no doubt about that. Okay, you should
you're
get
the
that.
one saying Zed.
I know. But the complaint about a global crossover, I'm like, I don't know.
No,
most of the time,
why would you pay
a global
$100?
crossover is. I know you wouldn't pay more if it was less.
Yeah.
And I would be like, well, a global crossover really isn't that bad.
That's fine. And to save $100, I'm fine giving it up. But if you're going to pay $100 more, why would you want it?
Why would you want the global crossover? I know.
It's weird.
But it sort of boggles my mind when stuff like this happens. So, really what you have is two consumer level brands here, which is Pioneer and Onkyo.
Sure.
Which have sister models, which we see all the time.
Yeah.
Just like Denon and Marantz has sister models.
That's
and
right.
that sort of thing. But the Integra is really an installer focused brand, which has been around for a long time. So, and then, if you look at Denon and Marantz, Denon and Marantz is almost like Onkyo and Integra, because Marantz generally has the pre-outs and it makes it a little bit more installer focused.
That's right.
Than the Denon is, which is more consumer level. But with this, whoever is the parent company of all these guys, who owns all of them now? I don't remember.
I mean, it used to be Gibson, but then I'm pretty sure they divested themselves of Gibson, and then the Onkyo was trying to get sold to Sound United, which are the parent company of Denon and Marantz, but that didn't happen.
Sound United said, "We've got two. Why do we need a third one?"
They're in with the same group as Klipsch and Yamo and all them now. That's who they're with now.
Right.
That's where the money's coming from.
Whoever that is.
That's Vox Audio. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah. Anyway, there is a way to get full set of pre-outs for that 9-channel model. It's the Integra, but it costs almost as much as the RZ50. So maybe you just go to 11.
There you go. So what's the go? He asks. Secondly, what's the go-to for accurate 6500K bias lighting these days? For those who don't know, bias lighting is a light that you put behind your screen or TV to shine on the wall behind. What it does is it creates. Isn't he got an OLED? Does he not have an OLED?
He's got an OLED. Yeah.
Okay. So what it does is if your blacks are not truly black, then it creates a little bit of a light behind it so that it gives you a little bit more of a contrast. So if you have a completely black room, for instance, or if your lights are completely off, you have complete light control, and you turn your TV on and it's nothing but a black screen, then and whatever is black on your TV, which for LEDs and LCD screens is not totally black unless they have full array local dimming and that sort of thing, is it'll be just a little bit gray. So what you'll do is you put the bias light behind it, shines a light on the back wall behind you so that it gives you some contrast and it makes those blacks look even blacker.
And it lets your pupils constrict just a little bit, because if you're in pure black room, your pupils are as wide open as they can possibly be. As sensitive to light as they can possibly be. So with the bias light on in your room, it's having a little bit of ambient light in behind the screen, and your pupils constrict a little bit, and that helps your perception of the black level.
So if your boy, I forgot his name, Steve, here is looking to try to get his blacks to be even more black because because the bias light that's not important with an OLED, because black is truly black because everything's turned off.
But I think he's going for,
if you're trying to alleviate any sort of eye strain that you might get from having a completely black room and then have it go from a dark scene to a really bright one, which can happen in movies like, well, I assume Dune. I haven't seen it yet, but any movie that has a cave and then outside, outside the cave is a desert like it is in Dune. You can go from very dark to very light very quickly, and it can cause your pupils to dilate and give you headaches.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're going by strict industry standards in a mastering studio, they have a little bit of ambient light. For HDR grading, they will have a 5-nit ambient backlight. That is an industry standard thing. So it isn't pure black, and if you're trying to recreate that at home, you might go for a bias light like they do in a mastering suite.
So what you got, Rob?
Okay, so I mean, I thought back to what used to be the absolute go-to, and they are still around, which is Ideal Lume. So the word ideal and then Lume. That's from a company called CinemaQuest Inc. They're still around, and the type of bias light that they sell, actually, the reason it has this form factor is they used to sell a fluorescent version of it, and then once they got LEDs that were good enough and stable enough, they switched over to that, but it basically still looks like a fluorescent light bar, the fluorescent tubes that you would, put into an office ceiling. It's that form factor, but as a accurate 6500K LED-based light. So if you just go for a single one of those, which is 2 feet long, that's the length of the tube, it's $64, and then they'll also sell you 2 of them together in a package that they call the panel light for $94. So there's a cost savings there because it's one power supply and blah, blah, blah that, reduces the cost a little bit there. But not everybody wants that form factor, and Ideal Loom has now, I'm not exactly sure everything that happened. It seems as though the guy who was primarily behind Ideal Loom has now gone over to a company called MediaLight. And MediaLight has actually several reviews, and I was like, is this just a hyped up thing? And then I was like, oh no, it's the guy who was behind Ideal Loom. He went and started a new company or seemingly or joined them or whatever it was, but called MediaLight. And actually their website is biaslighting.com, so they're not difficult to find if you're looking for bias lighting. But they have gone to these LED strips that you've seen all over the place, the ones that are kind of adhesive and bendy, and you can stick them to the back of your flat panel. They're using that form factor, but very, very accurate LEDs that are 6500 Kelvin. So I would actually point most people to their LX1. That is their least expensive one. They range from $25 to $50 for lengths going from, I think, 1 meter up to 6 meters or something like that. That's the differences in price. It's basically $5 more in the LX1 series for every meter that you add on to it. But if you want to have a dimmer that goes along with the LX1 lights, that costs extra. Now, it's only $5 extra for the basic dimmer, and they have a Wi-Fi dimmer version for only $9, so there's not like they're ripping you off with these prices. And the 4 meter length is almost certainly the one I would point most people to, because you don't really need to have the lights go all the way around all 4 edges of your screen. If they go around 3 edges of your screen, that's going to be best for most situations, especially if your TV is on a stand and not wall mounted. Then you really don't need the bottom strip along the back. You really just need the sides and the top. So the 4 meter length is going to be great for pretty much all the sizes. Usually we're looking at 65 to 85 inch TVs around here, and that's what the 4 meter length would be perfect for. And that's only $40, and then another $5 for the dimmer. So that's great. Now, if you want, they call it, their even higher end one, which is their MediaLight Flex Mark II. Very, very similar idea. It's the exact same lengths are available. The prices range from $63 up to $103, and for every meter that you're adding on, it's $10 more. The 4 meter version that we just talked about is $83, so it's a little over twice the price. Now, that includes the dimmer that comes with it. It includes a wall wart adapter that doesn't come with the LX1 series. It also, the difference between the LX1 series and the Flex Mark II series is there are more LEDs per inch on the Flex Mark II series. They also give you a longer warranty because they're basically like, for equal amounts of light, each LED doesn't have to be driven as hard on the Flex Mk2 series. Each individual LED, since there are more of them per inch, can be driven with less power and dimmer, so it lasts longer. So they give you a 5-year warranty on the Flex Mk2 series, and I think it's a 2-year warranty on the LX1. So those are basically the ones that you would go for. Honestly, they're equally accurate. For consumer purposes, you don't need to go to the Flex Mark II for greater accuracy to 6500. The LX1 is plenty accurate, so I'm quite happy to recommend the LX1 to almost everybody. That's probably the answer to it. I would go over there to biaslighting.com. Can't really go wrong with that.
All right. Infinite Gary. Gary is still waiting for his PSB upward-firing Atmos modules to be delivered, but in the meantime, he wrote PSB and asked them about the whole "how high should Atmos modules be mounted" question that's been bugging him. The one he asked us that we already answered. Yep. They wrote back with an answer that has even more confused than ever.
Perfect. Just what we wanted. So welcome back. He's come back again.
The speaker height position has to do with the reflection point and where that would send the sound out into the room. The higher you mount the speaker, the further the sound will be reflected into the room. From the wall that the speakers are backed against, or the higher the ceiling is, the closer the reflection point to the... Wait.
This is a quote from them. Yes, you can see why this is confusing.
Okay, I have to read this, so let me try again. The higher you mount the speaker, the further the sound will be reflected into the room from the wall that the speakers are backed against, or the higher the ceiling is, the closer the reflection point to the wall the speakers are backed against becomes. That is one sentence.
Yes, that was okay. We didn't write that. I didn't rewrite that. That was a quote.
So, all right. Okay. I'll finish reading the question, but I have a lot to say about this because I read the article about how I haven't published it yet, I don't think, about how the Atmos modules are supposed to work and what the reflection actually does.
Okay.
So that doesn't seem right, he says. But in any event, they didn't actually say that putting the Atmos modules on top of his wardrobe, only 2 feet from the ceiling, is a no-no. They just said it would change the location where the sound will reflect off the ceiling, and therefore he might have to move his seat. So what's our take?
Yeah.
Well, again, Gary, I can't stress this enough. The speakers are in order. They will arrive, and when they do, you will put them in a place, and they will either sound good or they will not sound good. And then you can move them to a different place. There's a part of me that gets, and I'm not talking about you, Gary. I'm talking about me spending too much time on Reddit recently. There's a part of me that just gets so infuriated with questions that are, I have ordered a thing, and now I am worried about this other thing that I read about. How do I deal with this? I'm like, it is in the mail.
Yeah.
You don't even know if you have the problem yet.
I get that feeling, though. I understand.
But I don't care. Okay, anyways. So, there's reflected sound, there's direct sound, right? And we know this, right? So if you put a speaker against a wall or close to a wall or facing a hard surface of any kind, the sound will bounce off of it. Okay, there's no doubt about that. That is a real thing. But to think that the only sounds you are getting from that speaker is the reflected sound is asinine on its face.
Well, I mean, it's
anyone
take a speaker out to a wide open field with no walls, face it completely away from you, and do you hear nothing?
Right.
But I mean, it won't sound the same as if it's turned around and facing you versus if you turn around and face it backwards in a wide open field, and then bring it into a room and turn the speaker around facing backwards, and you do hear something, and you hear more than when you were in the wide open field. So the reflections are real. There's definitely sound reflecting off of those walls and boundaries and coming back at you. But even in the wide open field, you don't hear nothing when the speaker is facing the wrong way.
So if you read the kind of analysis and the suggestions from Dolby and other people who have talked about how these reflected speakers are supposed to work, the idea here is that you're getting both direct and reflected sound.
Okay.
Now, that's the idea. Okay. Now there is some head-related transfer function that they apply to this in order to make your ear and your brain think that the reflected or the sound is coming from overhead. Right. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's not like the head-related transfer function, the EQ that they do, is not taking away from the direct sound.
Okay.
So if you read what they say, what they'll say is if the speaker is too far back, right, then the reflected sound will arrive at a different time than the direct sound, and your brain will choose the direct sound as being the one that is the primary because it came first. Okay? So, therefore, the speaker being too far back is not good because it will no longer, it will be harder for it to trick your brain into thinking it's coming from overhead.
Okay.
Now, if the speaker is too close, the direct sound will be so much louder than the reflected sound that your brain will think that the direct sound is the primary sound. Okay. So with Atmos speakers, this sort of, and this is why we see people who are like, it absolutely works. And there's other people who are like, I got them, they're garbage, throw them out. Okay. The thing here is that there is a perfect sort of sweet spot that has a bit of reflected and a bit of direct sound, and between the two, it just works just right so that your brain will identify through the head-related transfer function the reflected sound and the direct sound. It will all kind of come together as your brain saying that's coming from overhead, and the key thing, and then this is what I wrote in my article, the key thing is I don't care what Dolby says about where you should put these things, okay? They say you should put it on top of your other speakers. Yeah. There is no evidence whatsoever that your speakers are going to be placed in the right location for all this other crap to be happening at the same time. So you have to be willing to move these things around, and that includes up, down, left, right, forward, back. You have to be able to move them around in order to get this perfect synergy.
Just right in the right spot.
Yeah. So, that said, their answer is nonsensical, though I think what they're trying to say is exactly what I just said, which is depending on where you move them,
Right.
you're gonna change this mix of direct and reflected sound so that it can be more or less effective. Yes, you can put them 2 inches from the top from your ceiling, and yes, it might sound perfect, but it might sound terrible, and they will not know, and you will not know. And in fact, I don't think they'll know until you actually try it. I don't think there is a triangulation formula out there where they say how high is your ceiling, how high is this, and blah blah blah. I don't think that works.
When I read their verbatim reply, my instinct was I think they had that exactly reversed, because the angle on the face of the upward firing speaker does not change. That's at the 22.5 degree or whatever it is angle that they're specifying, and that doesn't change. So if you imagine that the sound really is like shooting out of the face of that speaker at an angle like a billiard ball, and it really is the reflected sound, then if the speaker were closer to the ceiling, then it would hit the ceiling earlier and closer to the speaker, and the angle of incidence is the angle of reflection, and that would mean that reflection comes down closer to the back wall. If you physically move the speaker down, then the angle is the same. The billiard ball comes out, but it's traveling a greater distance up to the ceiling, so it hits the ceiling farther away from the back wall. Angle of incidence is equal to angle of reflection, so the reflected sound would land farther away from the back wall. So logically speaking, to me it seemed like they had it exactly reversed, where to me it would make sense that if you move the upward firing speaker closer to the ceiling, then where the sound reflects back down to you is closer to the back wall. Just look at the angles. I don't know if this whole mix of direct and reflected sound changes that, but to me that's what logically makes sense. That's where I'll leave it.
Like I said, the way that these things work, it is so hard to really predict how well they're gonna work in your room. That's why people and this is an article where once I did the research and really kind of looked at how these things are supposed to work, I was like, okay, I see how, because if you read the Dolby stuff, they're like, sometimes upward firing modules will be better than on ceiling speakers. Right. And I'm like, how could that possibly be?
It was for the diffusion effect.
Yeah, and if you can properly place these things, they can be very effective. But, I mean, you're talking having the ability to really place them properly. And, of course, Dolby doesn't give you any sort of indication of where to put them other than on top of your other speakers. So this other thing, just what they're saying is...
Because, I mean, Gary's concern was about the height of the Atmos module.
Yeah, I don't... And I think it's more about, like you said, Rob, it's going to hit that ceiling and come down.
Yeah.
I
still think I'm right about
sharply.
that. I think they had it exactly reversed.
Yeah. The second question here, Gary has never experienced ButtKickers. He knows we aren't really fans for just so many reasons. And if you have multiple subs in a dedicated room, you're already feeling what you're supposed to feel, right? Any reason to consider them. So the reason to consider ButtKickers, or tactile transducers, as they are more commonly called, I'm looking at the article here, is because you do not have the ability to add subwoofers, or more likely play subwoofers at the right volume in order to feel the bass that you're supposed to feel.
You have to keep them quieter all the time.
For a fact that you have no such limitations.
That's not Gary's case,
Yes. So, yes, you are already feeling what you're supposed to feel. So the reason to add a tactile transducer is because you cannot feel that, because you cannot turn it up, or you cannot have subwoofers. But this is exactly the opposite of your last question, in that when I wrote the article about the Atmos modules, I thought to myself, okay, these make a little bit more sense. When I wrote the article about how to add a tactile transducer, I went, holy crap, these are so much a pain to get right. It is so not worth it. It's like, I literally do not think you should have a tactile transducer unless you are incapable of having a subwoofer, because there is just no way of you. The hoops you have to jump through and the cost you have to spend in order to
really do it right.
To do it right. It's just not worth it.
Of course, a lot of people, they They just put them on there and they're like, ooh, my seat is shaking, and they're happy because that's what they wanted.
That's what they were going for,
if that's what you want, that's fine. I mean, this is about enjoyment, so if that just gives you a thrill for a while and you're not one of these I care about utmost accuracy, then that's absolutely fine. To throw some Aura bass shakers on there because they're not very expensive, and if you're not going to worry about, I was applying EQ to my subwoofer output and that means the Aura bass shakers aren't, sometimes they're louder and shaking more than they should be, oh well, it's for fun if you're doing it that way. I would say the one other reason to consider them is if you are the person who really, really wants to experience sub 20 hertz bass that you cannot perceive in the form of sound waves. We perceive the harmonics of those, but you're just like, no, I want to actually feel 10 hertz. Then a tactile transducer would be a way to do that and genuinely have that frequency be the thing that you are actually feeling as opposed to perceiving the harmonic of it. So I'm kind of fine for adding, and ButtKicker would be the brand I would go for if I want that, because they're the ones that actually respond down to 3 hertz, and a lot of the other tactile transducers do not. So yeah, the full-size ButtKicker is something I could conceive of adding even in an accuracy seeking system if what you want the most is to feel something below 20
You're going to have to cross that thing over at 20 though, right?
Sure.
You're going to cross it over at, or maybe even look at your subwoofers and say, okay, they play cleanly down to 17 hertz.
That's right.
Which could be the case, or even lower in Gary's case.
Yeah.
You would literally have a low pass filter that would just
but like to me it actually makes sense, instead of going for an infrasonic fan or something like that, to go with a ButtKicker, because in that instance it's actually more affordable and reasonable in my opinion.
Keshaun wrote us earlier this year after making some major upgrades to his townhouse home theater. It had been 15 years since his previous upgrade, so he went big and got Klipsch reference Premier speakers all around, plus 4 Monolith 10-inch subs.
Yep.
Wow, those are heavy. Well, since the last time he wrote, he's made even more purchases. He didn't want to change the height of his center and subs up front. The height of his center and his subs up front, and his ceiling height is limited, so he couldn't go to a larger 16:9 screen, but keeping the same screen height and just going wider, he's now got a 115-inch 2.35:1 screen, and he loves a larger field of view. Great. Mm-hmm. He's also just decided to jump on Monoprice's Black Friday sale and picked up 2 more subwoofers. He's got a pair of the 15-inch monoliths and put them directly behind his couch while moving all 4 of the 10-inch subs to the front of the room. He knows it's massive overkill, but he does plan to move to a larger space where he'll be able to really turn them up. He also wanted to hear for himself what having all 4 of his 10-inch subs up front was like without changing the volume setting on any of them. The change in the volume was significant. That co-locating thing we've mentioned is real. Like we would make it up. But the back of his room also got a really boomy, so the whole uniformity thing is real too. Again, we don't make this stuff up. It sounds great with the dual 15-inch subs added in, though. So he's got his dual... Well, basically, he's got 4 subs up front,
yes.
And there is a... From wall to wall, like the speakers are almost touching the wall. So you've got a speaker, 2 subs, center, 2 subs. So they are all co-located.
Essentially,
I know,
yes.
I know that you think that you've got 2 subs on one side and 2 subs on the other, but given the length of the bass waves, they are co-located. I've actually saw a video on YouTube where the guy was arguing that having 2 subs does not just give you 3 dB of boost in your home theater, it gives you 6.
Okay.
I'm like, your subs are both up front and they're like 3 feet away from each other.
Just on the other side of the center speaker, yeah, sure.
They are co-located.
Yeah.
You have stacked them. You didn't physically stack them on top of each other, but you might as well if you stacked all 4 of these. So, yes, in the back of your room, he's got his 15s behind his couch, and they're back to back and right in the center of that couch. Those are also co-located for the most part. I mean, there's a couple of inches difference if you really wanted to make the argument, but I wouldn't. I would say that I've had pictures of this guy's theater. So.
Yes, yeah.
And I use them all the time.
Not since he has the dual 15s and the wider screens, so that's updated pictures.
Yeah, updated pictures here, so yeah. On the projector side, he went through 2 different Optima UHD 30 units. They go for about $1,300. That developed dead pixels soon after buying them. He was given a full refund both times, so he decided to make a huge upgrade and sprung for the 5500 Sony VW325ES genuine 4K projector, and that brings him to his questions. Sony does not have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, correct? Didn't Rob say something about it using the metadata on the disc and applying a single tone map setting? Probably.
Yes,
Rob says a
so
lot
this
of things.
this is a confusing thing that I'll try to make as clear as possible, which is so if we go over to JVC's projectors, they have frame by frame dynamic tone mapping. The HDR signal comes in, the JVC's, as long as you have their tone mapping turned on, their dynamic tone mapping turned on, they ignore the metadata completely on the JVC's and they just analyze every single frame of video themselves and adjust the picture to fit within the capabilities of the projectors. So if something is super duper bright, 4,000 nits in the signal, it'll tone map that down to the actual light output that the JVC is capable of. JVC now has their HDR Optimizer software as well, where you can enter your screen size and your screen gain. So that helps it calculate, because it knows what lamp setting you're in, that helps it calculate how many nits should actually be happening, and it does all of that tone mapping and that processing inside of the projector itself, frame by frame, no metadata involved. Sony's approach is different in that it does look at the HDR10 metadata, which is, one set of instructions that say, here is the brightest pixel in the whole movie, and here is the average picture level, and here is the mastering monitor that was used to make this movie. And sometimes that metadata is not correct, or parts of it are left completely blank. You can't necessarily rely on the metadata. But the Sony projectors, the new ones, they do look at the metadata. They are essentially set up to tone map 1,000 nit content correctly, as in they'll preserve all the detail in 1,000 nit content, but stuff that's brighter than 1,000 nits, it might start to clip off, or you won't see all the detail above 1,000 nits that's actually in the signal. But they do have a thing that they're calling Dynamic HDR Enhancer. And it's very confusing because they talk about it being frame-by-frame processing. And it is frame-by-frame processing, but it's not exactly the same as frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. What Sony has done is they've looked at the metadata, they've tone mapped it according to that metadata, so now there might be information that's just been clipped off and it's gone. There's no retrieving it. It's gone now. They tone mapped it to what they tone mapped it, and if there's information above that capability, it is gone and it's not coming back. Then they process that image frame by frame. And that's essentially just a gamma curve that they've put in. Shadows will be made a bit brighter, so they're easier to see. Highlights will be made a bit dimmer, so that it's easier to see the detail in the highlights. And through the middle range, all the middle parts, which is most of the image, they leave that alone to keep it accurate. That's their dynamic HDR enhancer. So there is a difference there. The end result, unless you have them side by side in the edge cases, where there are the little bitty highlights that were clipped off by the Sony, to actually discern it by eye, the end result looks really, really similar to one another. But if you have them side by side in the edge case of a particular scene, then the JVC will retain a little bit more detail. But that's what's going on there. So technically, Sony's projectors do not have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. They have regular 1,000 nit tone mapping, and then they mess with the image frame-by-frame after that. So I don't know if that's clear at all, but that is the case.
So his current Ultra HD Blu-ray player is a Sony X800 M2. Would switching to a Panasonic player give him some kind of frame-by-frame HDR control? Does it make a difference going from the $250 UB420 to the $500 UB820 to the $1,000 UB9000? So I thought they had tone mapping, but it was limited to certain you had steps that you could do.
Right.
On those.
So the Panasonic players do not have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. They are not a method of adding frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping to anything. The Panasonic players have a thing they call their HDR Optimizer. Keeping all these names straight, right? So you've got actual frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping in the JVCs. You've got the dynamic HDR Enhancer in the Sony projectors. And then you've got the HDR Optimizer in Panasonic's players. What Panasonic's players do is they do look at the metadata. They look at the metadata. So again, if the metadata is wrong, then things might turn out wrong. But they look at the metadata. and then they will tone map everything down to a level that you select. So the difference really between the 420 and the 820 is just Dolby Vision. That's really the only difference between those two. And for a projector, that makes no difference. So there isn't really a reason to get the 820 over the 420 for a projector. The UB9000 at $9000 at $1,000. It does add more options for the HDR Optimizer, including lower nit levels. The lowest nit level on the UB420 is 500 nits, whereas you can go down to 350 and 200 or something like that. There's options in the UB9000 that are below 500 nits that aren't available in the UB420. But remember how we said the Sony projectors already tone map 1000 nit content really well. That's really what they're set up to do. And then if you want to turn on that dynamic HDR enhancer that the Sony projectors have, they'll mess with the image after that point and make shadows more visible and highlights more visible. That's optionally can be done. So you really only need to send 1000 nit metadata to your Sony projector. That's really our goal, is to send the Sony projector 1000 nit metadata, because from there, the Sony projector on its own handles it really well. So all that's missing in this whole equation is, let's say you're sending the Sony projector 4000 nit metadata off the disk, right? You've got a disk player that just takes whatever's there and sends it to the projector. If you're doing that, then some of the detail in the highlights will be clipped off by the Sony's built-in tone mapping. And that detail is gone and it's never coming back. So if instead you play that 4000 nit content through a Panasonic, but you tell the Panasonic, use your HDR Optimizer to take that 4000 nit content and shrink it down to 1000 nit before you send it out. You do that with the Panasonic, and now what the Sony gets is 1000 nit metadata from the Panasonic player, but all of that detail from 1000 to 4000 nits, that was preserved by the Panasonic player ahead of time. Now the Sony takes that 1000 nit metadata with all of that highlight detail preserved by the Panasonic, and it does its tone mapping, but it does it really well. So to me, it is worth switching over to the Panasonic player, but I think you just need the 420. You just need the $250 420, because it'll do 1000 nit, no problem, but it'll retain some of the detail that the Sony natively would have clipped off. So I think that's a great solution that doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
All right. Dazz put up
we didn't get his last question.
Oh, did I already scroll past it?
You probably did.
He doesn't feel as though his current image is lacking in any way, but if he's missing out on something he wants in, so what's the best way to maximize his projector's image? I mean, you could have it calibrated. That would do something. But,
and I wanted to mention, because in what we've just talked about, using what the Sony can do natively with its a dynamic HDR enhancer and combining it with a Panasonic UB420, none of that gets you to frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. That doesn't get you to just ignoring the metadata completely and analyzing the signal frame-by-frame. Now, over on Brightside Home Theater Podcast, DJ has been talking up his Lumagen Radiance video processor. He's over the moon about the thing. I've got a little bit of quibble because he's kind of invoked my name and AVRant's name as, like, supporting what he's doing, and I'm not really on board, DJ. To speak directly to DJ, it's not... There's a whole gray area that I don't have time to get into.
God, you're getting slammed by Rob. I mean, this is what it feels like to be absolutely eviscerated by a Canadian. That's what it sounds like. I'm not completely on board with what you're saying in my name. You have just been, I mean, how do you even, you just slink off into the corner and don't come out for a month or two because Rob has put you in your place, son.
Just burned it to the ground. Most of that is just due to time on DJ's part, where he and I had like an hour and a half long conversation and he condensed it down to one sentence. So not all the nuance is going to be preserved. That would be like tone mapping our conversation to a really extreme degree. A whole bunch got clipped off and lost. But the Lumagen Radiance would be a way. You add that to your Sony projector and that'll give you frame by frame dynamic tone mapping. It costs more than the Sony projector that you bought, so I don't know if that's a good value proposition. I would almost certainly opt to get a JVC that already has the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping built into it. And I'm not even talking about the brand new laser models that start at $10,000. Get one of the still available lamp-based models that costs thousands of dollars less than that. But that would be a method to do it. And there isn't really another way to do it with like a device you can add on to the projector that you already have. So that's there, and it would do an excellent job. I just am not as on board with the Lumigen as DJ is, because DJ has kept saying, "Oh, I've read the reviews, and everyone says that the Sony and the JVC projectors natively are really close to each other, and then the image I'm seeing having added the Lumigen to my Sony is so significantly different that I can't imagine." DJ has never seen a JVC projector. "I can't imagine that the JVC is as good, because everyone says the JVCs and the Sonys were already close together." I'm like, those are years old reviews before JVC had their dynamic tone mapping. The difference between a JVC and a Sony now is pretty significant. That DJ didn't quite have that accurate when he was been talking about that. But if you got a Lumigen, they are very, very good. So there you go.
Thou shalt not take Rob's name in vain, DJ. Lest thou incur the wrath of AVRant. You shall be expelled from our friend group and blocked on Twitter.
Addressed.
You must confess your sins and make atonement for all the wrongdoings that you have done. Dazz put up a couple of polls in the home theater enthusiast group on Facebook. They happened to line up with a couple of topics we talked about during our Thanksgiving episode. The poll results came back with the majority of the group's member wanting to stick with projection setups, both at home and at theaters. They don't seem to be keen on switching to huge flat panel displays, be they 97-inch OLEDs or modular micro LED displays. One concern is price, which is understandable at the moment, and the other big concern is audio. It's probably because of the not acoustically transparent screen.
That's what's coming up.
No damn difference whatsoever. We talked a little bit about how audio is being handled for huge flat panels like Samsung's Onyx and the Wall, but could we delve a bit deeper into that subject? There are members of the Facebook group who insist that acoustically transparent screens are the only way to have both a huge field of view and the very best audio experience. But Dazz figures an acoustically transparent screen must always be at least a slight compromise for the image, because if sound can get through, surely some light is leaking through. So in all, how will we get the best audio if projection setups get replaced by huge flat panels? The same way we get the best audio right now, which is to put a center channel right below the screen, and you'll never notice the difference.
We've said ourselves that in the instances where the screen becomes so large that the center below the screen would be like on the floor, or 2 inches off the floor, that starts to be a compromise to the sound. Now, our solution is don't make your screen quite that big and then sit a little closer. Like that, that's our advice on this podcast. But
you can look at Mk2 speakers, and they've been designed from the beginning to be placed on the floor below a screen. Sure. All three speakers up front, they are like reverse Prime Elevation speakers.
Yeah,
they were always intended to be used that way. If we get to the point where huge flat panels are really a thing, look for that design to make a comeback. There's also no reason why you can't place those speakers, above at least your center channel, above the screen, if that's where you have your extra space. I really think that, especially with multiple rows of seats, putting your center channel up high makes more sense, as there is a clear line of sight to everybody, and your brain's just great at putting those sounds into the mouths of the people who are speaking them, or into the image of which you are watching.
But
does
the same
a fantastic job.
Can happen if you get your screen so large that it's right up against the ceiling, or you don't even have space for a center speaker up there. So I think it is the two solutions that they are already essentially using in the full-size commercial movie theaters, and at home, that we did mention on the Thanksgiving episode, which is one, if you can use the actuator solution that Sony's already using on their OLEDs, where the screen itself becomes the speaker. As long as you can get that up to a little bit better audio quality, which is doable. LG still hasn't brought it to market as a consumer product, but their version of the screen is the speaker. In fact, the screen is 3 speakers. To me, that's a fantastic solution. These people are complaining that the speaker has to be physically right behind the middle of the screen. You can't get better than the screen itself is the thing making the sound. So I think that solution will continue to develop and could definitely, assuage the fears of the people who feel that way. And the other one to me is beamforming of sound. The Yamaha's digital sound projectors worked. They worked. Yeah. And there's no reason why we can't use that same technology. It's many, many small diameter drivers, but firing at incredibly well calculated, timing apart that they control the wave interference to form these beams that come right at you or actually do reflect off of walls really effectively because they're limited in their bandwidth. For something like getting the sense that the dialogue direction is coming from exactly where you want it to be, beamforming can absolutely work for that. So I think those are the solutions.
Okay. We said during our Thanksgiving episode that even though they're very expensive right now, we believe micro LED displays will get there, and the modular design makes too much sense not to be a success at some point. But what about rollable OLEDs? We didn't really talk about those much, though I think that Lee's take on it was extremely get off my lawn. I don't understand how these things could possibly roll up and not get damaged after some time. I don't know, Lee. How do you drive an electric car? Somebody invented it, and it finally worked. It's going to happen. Shut up. Let me see. About rollable OLEDs, we didn't really talk about those. Dazz is betting they could take off faster than modular displays if they ditch the fancy motorized design, and instead it's just a huge flexible display. The point of it being flexible isn't so that you can roll it up and down every time you use it. It would simply be about being able to physically get a gigantic flat panel in through your door. So roll it up, bring it in, and then permanently hang it on your wall. So what do we think? Could that conceivably happen faster and at a lower price than micro LEDs?
No.
I don't think so.
I do think it can happen, just not faster and cheaper than micro LED.
No, I think micro LEDs, that's a technology that you've got a thing that already works. You just got to make it smaller. And that's what scientists are really good at. Like, okay, here's the thing. Make it smaller. They're like, okay, I get this, right? Yeah, like here's something that doesn't bend, make it bend. They're like, I'm sorry, what?
They have been running after this because the pick and place procedure is what makes it so expensive. When you have a robotic arm that is picking up individual micro LEDs and placing them on a PCB, which is how the wall is manufactured right now, that is a tremendously time-consuming, expensive process. They have been running as fast as they can towards inkjet printing of OLEDs and quantum dots. For some reason, that still hasn't quite hit the mainstream, but it's gonna get there one day. And the other one is they already have the prototype form of, instead of a PCB backplane, it's a TFT backplane, which they're already making with LCDs. So once you combine that, if you can have a TFT backplane and inkjet printed micro LEDs that get deposited onto that TFT backplane through inkjet printing instead of pick and place with a robotic arm, that's gonna be so much less expensive, so much faster, and like that's just going to take off. And all of those technologies are right on the cusp.
TCL is also working on that too,
absolutely.
If I remember correctly.
They've
been
all working on
it for a lot. Is it J
OLED?
J something.
Absolutely working on it. So all of that is like, when that all comes together, and there's it's actually not unreasonable to think that they're all going to come together right around the same time.
I think so. Watch them all hit within like a 2023. Boom.
Yep. That is just going to explode. Whereas the rollable OLED, like, they can make it, but it's a process.
I've even seen like those foldable phones, and people are like, here's my foldable phone after 1 year of use. It's got this nice big crease down the middle.
So like I said, I actually do think we'll get to roll up displays that you take along with you like a yoga mat. I think we'll get there. I don't think it'll be as fast and as low a price as the micro LEDs. I think they're set to hit in like 2 to 3 years, the micro LEDs.
I want to say lastly, but there are some more questions.
Two.
Okay, what about ultra short throw projectors? There seem to be more and more brands offering UST models. So are they the future? Or are they just a stopgap until massive flat panels become more affordable, or are they the new rear projection TV that will quickly fall out of favor and seem sort of humorous and antiquated when we think back on them in a few years? No, so the rear projection TVs were fairly awful. I mean, almost universally. I've reviewed some back in the day, some bigger ones. I've been at people's houses where they've had like those narrow ones that they made for a short period of time.
And it was the physical size and inconvenience of them too.
Yeah. So the ultra short throws, the real problem with them is the screen more than anything else. I like I think that the technology is useful, and I think it'll actually stay around for quite some time.
I do too.
I think you're going to see it never really go away from business applications.
Yep.
You're going to see those like in schools and stuff like that. We've, of course, the schools have had them for a long time, and so have businesses. But making them for the consumer market and be able to mass produce them, you're going to see that some of these technologies that they developed more so for home theater are going to make their way into the business market as well, including the ambient light rejecting screens, which of course always existed, but they've been certainly more perfected for home theater. And then just getting them brighter and brighter and brighter, which is what
until we do have a rollable OLED that's really affordable, an ultra short throw projector is the easiest way to take a huge image wherever you want to go and set it up really quite quickly.
I feel like what you're going to see go away first is traditional projectors.
Yeah.
This at the back of the room projector, that is not, I don't care what your Facebook group says. It is not long for this world. It is inconvenient. It requires you to buy a long HDMI cable.
You've got to keep the room dark. You absolutely have to.
You have to keep the room dark. And it becomes, if you want to have any sort of clean installation, you end up having to have cables that you cannot easily swap out unless you have done your room from scratch. Whereas an ultra short throw projector is a lot like a TV.
Yep.
It's the cable is going to be right there at the front of the room, and that's where I think that's going to be the dying cough of the home theater projector. That the last thing that you're going to see is ultra short throw projectors getting a bigger and bigger images, because right now they're like, it's really great if you want 110.
Yep. 100 to 120, that's it.
If you want 100, we can do that. If you want 120, we can do that. But 110 is perfect. If you want to go outside of 120 or 100, maybe you should not get our thing. So you're going to see them getting more flexible and bigger. And that's going to be the thing that's going to keep them going, is getting bigger and bigger. And if you eventually, I think we'll even see them getting bigger than the 135 that we normally see as kind of being the max of your traditional home theater projector. And that's going to keep them going for even longer. But it's not going to be they're not going to be sort of this blip. I think they're going to be the thing that keeps projectors viable longer than I think they should.
And
be.
Like what we were saying about the technology advancing for micro LEDs, somebody developed these lower cost lenses and light sources, and that's why we're seeing this explosion of ultra short throw projectors right now.
Yeah. So in this basement theater, it's T-shaped with the hallway opening basically in the middle of the right wall. With all the basement doors closed, he's dealing with about 4,000 cubic feet. He's still using his SVS SB12 NSD subs, which are like 2 series ago.
Yeah.
Sealed box, 12-inch drivers. So it'd be similar to the SB2000. It's the same thing. And he has wanted to upgrade for a while now, but he's been waffling on the decision. And now SVS's prices have all gone up. So should he snag a couple of SB2000s while SVS's holiday sale is on, or should he replace his sealed subs with a pair of larger ported bottles from a different brand? It seems as though HSU might still be the best bang for the buck. He's strongly considering the VTF3 Mark Vs. What's our take? My take is a cylinder. That's my take, because you got a bigger room than I think that you think you do.
But for the price, I mean, when it comes down to bang for buck in terms of just output for the price, those VTF3 Mark Vs, nobody's beating them. Power sound audios all cost more. So, the absolutely, if that's what you want, now it's just the sheer physical size. Make sure you know the sheer physical size. I would probably opt in this space. If it were me, I would probably opt for replacing the SB2000s with the larger ported subs, because I think if you get a pair of SB2000s and stack them on top of your SB12
Right.
NSDs, like it's still not going to be as much 20 hertz bass as the VTF3 Mark V. So
Yes.
that would be the way I would go on that one.
Yeah. So far he's made 11 2-foot by 4-foot by 2-inch thick panels. He's used wreath hangers and French cleats to mount them, and that's worked out well, giving him about an inch of air gap behind each panel. Now he'd like to treat the front wall behind his front 3 speakers. Should those panels be thicker than 2 inches to better address the boundary effects? I mean, all of them should be thicker than 2 inches, really, if you could. But since they're not, then if you've got the space, make them thicker. I don't think they necessarily have to be, but they definitely could be.
Yes. Ideally, you would. Ideally, I'd go, 3.5, 4 inches of insulation and an air gap if I could, like about 6 inches total. If possible, I would go thicker.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Sorry, just doing that. Mitch. In Mitch's bedroom setup, he's got a wall-mounted 77-inch OLED that fits perfectly in between 2 doors on his front wall. Since the doors are close on either side, he can't put his front left and right speakers any wider apart, so they are on a stand below the TV, the same width apart as the width of the TV. Since they're kind of close together and also 12 feet away from his viewing position, he hasn't bothered with the center speaker. He's running a 4.1 setup, and it's mostly just for watching TV before bedtime. He picked up 1 pair of SVS Prime bookshelf speakers and 1 pair of Prime satellites, plus an SB1000 sub there, all being powered by his Denon X1600H receiver. He's still within SVS's return window, and as we know, sending any of the speakers back wouldn't cost him anything thanks to SVS's 2-way shipping. He's curious about the new monoprice Monolith Encore B6 speakers, which are $180 each. I am supposed to get those in for review. They haven't showed up yet.
Right.
And also Monolith's THX265B bookshelf speakers that are Atmos enabled and include upward firing drivers, $270 each. Both are less expensive than SVS's Prime bookshelf speakers, which are $300 to $350 each. But he asked Monoprice, and he would have to pay for return shipping if he orders the Monolith speakers and decides to return them. At the moment, he thinks the Prime bookshelf speakers are just okay. Maybe he just needs more time to get used to them, or maybe their placement not wide enough apart and close up against the front wall means they don't sound their best. So he's hoping we can say whether we think either of the Monolith options will sound better. I think your problem is your room. And I mean the placement is issue, but not really for what you're talking about as far as so if you think they just sound okay, these are speakers that just sound okay because either your placement issues or your room itself, which is what I think is more of the issue, is causing problems. So getting a different speaker in here will only make a difference if that different speaker has a sound that is not trying to be flat. And I believe that the monoprice speakers, for the most part, because especially the THX ones, which are like guaranteed to be going for a flat frequency response, I don't think they're going to really sound any better. I think they're going to sound more similar than dissimilar in here.
Right. Yeah, so, I haven't heard the Encore series yet, and Tom hasn't had a chance to hear them yet. Supposed to be hearing them soon, but hasn't had a chance to hear them yet. So we can't say for sure on the Encore B6 series, but everything we know about the way that all of these speakers are designed and what they're aiming for target-wise, I just don't have the inclination that these would be some kind of drastic change over what you've already got. Also, I just don't think those Monolith speakers are going to physically fit very nicely.
Yeah, I was going to say, you think you have a problem fitting the SVSs? Get the Monolith, man. They mean Monolith. They gave it the name. They're like, they're trying to clue you into everything's big.
They are physically very large speakers. Make sure you build yourself a cardboard model and try that out in comparison to the SVS Prime bookshelves that you already have, because I think you're going to get a look at the size of these boxes in real dimensions, not just the images of them where they look much more compact than they are. So I'm just not big in favor of this one. Not that I don't think the monoprice Monolith speakers are a very good buy. It's just I don't think this is the case where they're somehow going to be worth way more than the Prime bookshelf speakers.
Yeah. Right. And I would spend my time and money looking at Now, that being said, okay, so I would spend my time and money on room treatments or, looking at this room and trying to figure out what it is. Because, I mean, you're 12 feet away in a bedroom. You're basically leaning on the back wall.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably.
That's what you're doing. So you've got all sorts of, as far as how you are oriented in the room, plus how much room treatments there's actually going on in here and everything else. All those things are going to contribute more to your sound experience than the actual speakers themselves.
Right. I'll be honest with you. This is the scenario where, this is anecdotally, this is pure subjective opinion on my part, but this is the sort of setup where I've actually really liked Golden Ears speakers in this type of compromised placement. The room isn't particularly well treated, but I want to hear dialogue really clearly. Golden Ear speakers, Martin Logan's Motion series would be a good choice in here as well. They're not necessarily going for ruler flat accuracy, but sometimes that's not what you want. Sometimes that's where they excel. So I would suggest those to you as a potential.
Okay. JR. Seems as though JR is strongly considering a change of speakers in his home theater. He likes his KEF LS50 Metas, which are $1,600 a pair. Oh, I heard somebody on Reddit say that how much better these were than the other ones. I'm like, but are they really though?
But I bet that wasn't a blind comparison.
I bet it wasn't. And he's thinking of replacing his B&W setup with those. I mean, B&W has a sound, and I think the KEFs are going for a more ruler flat frequency response. So you will experience a difference here.
Oh yes, you will notice quality. A change.
So if he gets a pair of LS50 Metas for his front, left, and rights, what should he get as a center speaker, and what should he get for his surrounds? Well, for your center speaker, you should get an LS50 Meta.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was... It's entirely possible he was unaware that there is the ability to buy a single LS50.
One,
Now, they call it an LS50C. And if you take the price of $1,600 a pair, that would be $800 each. They charge $900 for the LS50C, so they're charging an extra $100 to give you a single one for some reason
to break a married pair.
That's right. But there is that, and there is really nothing else I would choose as my center speaker if I'm getting LS50 Metas as my front, left, right.
No,
I would get the LS50C without question for the center.
And then for the surrounds, though, I think you've got options.
Yes.
You could go with the Q series. There's all sorts of bookshelves. So the 350, the 150. I think there's other ones. I don't remember. But I would go with one of those, whichever one you had. I mean, I don't really think. I think they're going to sound similar enough that it's going to be a good experience. So
like the Q150, those typically go for, what is it, $600 a pair. They're actually on sale right this moment for $350 a pair, which is a pretty darn good deal on Q150s. Now, the thing is, though, he does want to put them close to his side wall. And the Q150s have a big old port on the back, and just their own depth on their own is pretty deep from front to back. They're a pretty beefy speaker that way. So for that reason, I would strongly consider they're listed as their Atmos modules, but they are absolutely fine to mount on the wall. These will have a little wedge-shaped angle to them, but you mount them a little bit higher, which we kind of want to do anyway, just to give head clearance for across your seats. So you can go in the Q series, that's the Q50A for their Atmos module version, which is totally wall mountable. Those go for $700 a pair. They're not cheap, but it's within the same ballpark as the Q150s at their regular price. If you want to get drivers that are actually, technically more similar to what you have in the LS50 Metas, you could go up to the R series. The R series has a wedge-shaped Atmos module that is wall mountable as well. That is the R8A. Those go for $1,550 a pair, so they're almost exactly the same price as the LS50 Metas. I think that's overpriced and unnecessary for your surround speakers. I would definitely consider the Q50A Dolby Atmos modules.
So the center needs to fit on his Monolith AV stand below his TV. His B&W center was quite tall, so there's a good amount of room to work with. And he'd prefer his surrounds to be wall-mounted, although he could add a small shelf to each side to hold his surround speakers that way if it would be best. So we already made our suggestions.
And there should be no problem filling that LS50C in the space that you already have.
There's a lot of room. I actually think you need to separate your front, left, and right speakers a little bit. If you can cheat them out. If they're any narrower than the width of your couch, then you should expand them a little bit. I do see your SVS cylinder sub over there, though, so like that.
Yeah.
Brannon, ever since we convinced Brannon to just try a couple of DIY absorption panels, he's become a believer in room acoustics being the most important thing. All right, let's not jump all the way into the deep end here, buddy. All right, it's important, but it's not the most important thing. It's impossible to have sound without speakers. So he's got panels in his dining room now. They were supposed to be temporary, but it's amazing how much better and more comfortable it is to have a conversation with his family. So those panels are staying. I want to tell you right now, when we redid our kitchen, I was like, we 100% need panels in here, but I don't know how I'm going to convince my wife to get more. We've got panels, but they're all black, and I don't know. I'd have to do something to convince her to do it, but we'll see. He's remodeling a room with the current dimensions of 11 by 16 by 7 foot 9 inches. There's a little bump out for the door, but otherwise it's an enclosed rectangle. He will have absorption panels at the first reflection points of the side walls, on the back wall, and on the front wall behind the speakers. But as important as acoustics are to him, looks are important too, and he wants his room to be soundproof as well.
Yep.
Okie dokie. So he's talked to a soundproofing company, as his room is on a slab foundation and it has adjoining rooms. One of their suggestions was to cover the whole floor with their Serenity mat and then put down a subfloor of plywood on top of that. That will basically decouple the room's floor from the slab foundation to help prevent vibrations via the floor into other rooms of the house. But that will mean subtracting 1.5 inches of height from his already shorter room. And the finished flooring is going to be laminate. Oof.
So that's part of the looks thing.
Yeah. So Brannon looked into what he could do to treat the ceiling, and he found the Ensemble acoustically transparent drywall to finish the finish system from a company called USG. For soundproofing purposes, you still finish the ceiling as normal, but then you install a metal T-bar system similar to a drop tile ceiling but stronger, and the Ensemble acoustically transparent drywall panels are attached to that. They sell their own complete systems with T-bars and sound-absorbing backer material. They offer 1-inch thick and 2-inch thick absorption options, but he contacted the company and they said you can use any absorption material you like, and you can make it any thickness. He got some samples and was pleasantly surprised when he tried our simple breath test, and it was easy to blow through the burlap, but it looks like finished drywall, so that impressed him. He's eager to give it a try in the small enclosed room, because if it works well, he will also install it in his living room and dining room, which both have large sections of hard, flat surfaces, but for aesthetic reasons, he can't put up a ton of panels. So he wants to ask us, how thick should he make this ceiling treatment? He's concerned that starting with a ceiling height of only 7 feet 9 inches, then he'll be losing some height to the soundproofing floor, which is 1.5 inches, so they'll be down to 6 foot 4 inches. Should he go with 2-inch absorption behind an ensemble finish, maybe a 2-inch insulation with an air gap behind it? Thicker is better, right? What do we think? I think that this is not a soundproofing option. This is different. So, this is allowing you to put up essentially absorptive material all over your ceiling, which is a great idea for room acoustics, but does absolutely nothing for soundproofing.
Well, that's why this is the same thing as putting insulation onto your already finished ceiling and then putting fabric over it. Is just, instead of fabric, it's a thing that looks like drywall.
Right.
Or in fact, it is drywall with a bunch of holes in it. That's what it is.
Is that what it is?
It's
yeah, okay.
It's drywall with a bunch of holes in it, but they've created just this very thin layer that is acoustically transparent that you can blow through, and then you finish it off with their spray. It has to be the correct type of spray that keeps it all acoustically transparent. But yeah, it's instead of fabric, it's drywall. That's right. What we're doing here. Now, so he already did mention the idea is you do still finish the ceiling as normal. That's your soundproofing part of things.
And you're going to be losing more height.
You're going to be losing some height to what soundproofing company recommended. And the thing is, code says that your ceiling height is supposed to be 7 feet 6 inches. That's regular ceiling height. So you're starting at 7'9", you're losing 1.5 inches to the floor. You're going to lose 1.5 inches to the soundproof ceiling. I just don't think you can do this. You're at 7'6" at that point. I don't, as honestly, I like that this exists. I didn't know about this. I'm very happy that you told us about this. Yeah. Because this is something I'm very likely going to be recommending to people who are like, I just don't want the fabric look. I want it to look like drywall, but I want to still be able to, essentially have the false wall thing where there's absorption behind it. So I'm like, great, here is acoustically transparent drywall. It's going to be more expensive than fabric, but that's exactly what people are looking for, including, Brannon here is looking for this. But, yeah, this isn't the room where you can do it, unfortunately. Code is kind of preventing it, and the soundproofing is more important. It's much more important in your dedicated theater to have the soundproofing than it is to have this look of acoustically transparent drywall on your ceiling. So I wish I could be more on board. I am on board with this idea of the product. If you can try it like in your living room or something, I'm 100% for it. I don't see any reason it wouldn't work. It's the same as putting fabric over insulation, except it looks like drywall. I don't think this needs to really be trialed to believe that it would work. I have absolutely no doubts that this is a solution that can work for that look that you want in the living room. But in your theater, I think you're going to have to rely on the acoustic treatment that you're going to do on your walls. You just by code don't have the height unless you want to violate code, okay.
Right. So he's got 7 feet 9 inches. I misspoke earlier. So he's got 7 feet 9 inches. He's going to lose an inch and a half at least to the floor, so that puts him down at 7'7" and a half inches, and then he's probably going to lose another inch and a half to the ceiling the soundproofing purposes, and that puts him down to 7'6".
To code. That's where you are.
So at that point, if you wanted to put panels on your ceiling,
yes,
I mean, there's nothing that's stopping you from doing that.
That's right.
Now you can make the argument that this false ceiling you're putting in there is not the actual ceiling. You know what I mean? But
right,
then,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you could make the argument that the actual ceiling, is 7 feet 6 inches, if that's what it ends up being. But I don't know how well that would go over. Like
because
as somebody who's worked with contractors before, I'll tell you what they'll tell you to do. They'll say, we're going to finish this room. We're going to have the inspector come in. The inspector is going to okay it. And then we'll install your crazy ceiling thingy that you want.
Yeah.
Okay. But that does mean that they would have to install any lighting as sconces and not into the ceiling.
Yeah.
Because the ceiling would have to be completely bare. Because if not, then it'll be clear that, I mean, like how they'd have to install it and then uninstall the lighting and everything else. So
whereas if you just hang a regular acoustic panel on your ceiling, that's no problem. You could have that before the inspector arrives, because that's like, hanging a picture on your wall. That's not the wall, it's the picture on the wall. A panel is, and you could remove, if they question it, you can remove the panel easy enough, right? So I think in this case, and the thing was, he wasn't saying my ceiling is the only acoustic treatment I can have. He's like, I'm going to have panels on my walls, all four walls. I'm like, I think you'll be okay, even without the entire ceiling being covered with. Because the thing is, like, at most, you could do the 1-inch system in here, assuming that the soundproofing is already be accounted for in the ceiling and you've got 1.5 inches to play with within code. You can't even do the 2-inch system. You could do a 1-inch or 1.5-inch system. Like, is that even really worth it? We're getting rid of the highest frequencies, but you could do that by putting some thick rugs on your laminate floor instead. Like, that's cheaper and easier than finishing the entire ceiling this way. So in this specific room, I don't think this is really the right way to go. I would put, if you need some additional acoustic treatment after you've treated all your walls, and maybe he's going by measuring RT 60 times, like, I got to get it a little bit lower, I would add some panels to the ceiling. I don't think I would treat the whole ceiling this way.
Yeah, I think it might end up being overkill and overpriced for what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Rug, wall treatments.
Yeah.
Install everything and listen, and then decide whether or not you think you need to have treatments on your ceiling. I'll tell you, in my theater.
But in the living room, I say go for it. And yes, go as thick as you reasonably can. You can't really go too thick. That's not going to be a thing. So I'm sure there are some aesthetic concerns in the living room as well. Go as thick as you can reasonably.
Mitch, now that he got himself an LG C1 OLED and an Apple TV 4K, he's realized firsthand there are so many different formats, picture modes, and settings to deal with now. There's regular SDR, then there's HDR10, then there's Dolby Vision, potential day and night versions for all of them, and then the gaming versions for all three as well.
Yep.
He knows we've gone over multiple settings before, but could we possibly do him the favor of collecting them all in one place? He's tried following Ertzing's settings for a C1, but they didn't quite cover everything. So it looks like Rob's got some links for you here.
And that's really all this answer is going to be. It is a series of links. I'm not going to go through all the settings because it's too much to cover here, and the links are the point that they've covered it in more depth than even I would cover them. So there's one from AV Forums that does a terrific job of covering for your movies and television, your SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision settings, and they explain some things in there that can be confusing as well. So I like it. They're complete, and they go through the power saving things that you want to turn off and stuff as well. So that's really good for the movie and TV side of things. Vincent Teo over at HDTV Test has 2 specific videos for setting up the C1 with a PS5 and setting up the C1 with an Xbox Series X. Like, all the settings in both the television and the consoles. Can't go wrong with those videos there. And for the Apple TV 4K, Home Theater Engineering has one where I'm like, hey, they actually got it right. Yay, I don't have to say it again. I can point you to that link now. So 4 links to other YouTube videos will be in the show notes, and please peruse those, and you'll have all the info you need. It'll take you like over an hour to go through all of it if you listen to it at one time speed.
Going forward, if anybody's got a question about these things, Rob's just going to send you an email that says, check the show notes.
On this specific combination, that's where it's going to be.
Okay. Mel is building a house from the ground up in Texas. That means he can custom build a dedicated theater room, whatever he wants, within reason. He would like to stick with using an OLED for his display, so he's got a 65-inch right now, and he obviously would like to go bigger in the new theater, but sticking with the OLED is the plan. Since he basically has free reign, what should be the dimensions of his theater room? Some Googling has led him to a suggestion of 15 feet wide by 20 feet long by 11 feet high, but what do we suggest? So there are room mode calculators out there, which will tell you it's basically a ratio of the front wall to the side walls to the height. And what that does is give you the fewest number of overlapping frequencies where the sound, as it bounces around your room, reinforces or nullifies itself.
Like if there's a standing wave between the floor and ceiling, you aren't duplicating that same standing wave between your side walls or your front and back wall. It's having it so that they're going to have standing waves, but it'll be in one direction. That's basically the idea of the room mode calculator. So we'll have a link to that, and you can sort of just play around that trial and error to see what they have. They give you this nice little target map, and if your crosshairs land within the target map, you're basically good. So that keeps it relatively easy to do that by trial and error. But just sort of working through it, one way that I would look at it is, okay, I'm assuming you're probably going to go for the 83-inch OLED, maybe the 97, but that's, I suspect, going to be over $20,000, around $20,000, but I think over that price. So I'm thinking the 83-inch for under $5,000 makes a lot more sense if that was the idea. And for me, being a dedicated theater, I'd want to sit 7.5, 8 feet away from an 83-inch OLED. So if I take that as my starting distance from eyes to screen, and then I'm not sure, do you want 2 rows of seats? Because I think if you're going to build this room, you're probably going to err on the side of making the room itself a little bit larger than smaller. I don't think you're going to want to target like the smallest room possible. He already talked about 15 by 20, so I'm assuming he's kind of looking in that range and just trying to get, really precise on it. So I say, okay, if you got 2 rows of seats, you're sitting, let's say, 8 feet away from an 83-inch OLED, and I would put the OLED on a stand. Instead of wall mounting it, I would put it on a stand and have it maybe 2 feet from the front wall. Now I can acoustically treat the front wall and behind my front speakers and all that nice stuff. And then I'd have 4 feet behind my second row of seats. And, we landed on 21 feet. That's where I landed, 21 feet. Acoustically speaking, if you're playing around with that calculator, works out really, really nicely to have a room that's 21 feet long. I don't think we're way off of what he was already considering, so that's probably a reasonable. To me, 17 feet wide is super comfortable for a theater, because what that lets you do is put in 4 theater recliners across, like love seat, and then 2 seats on either side, like angled inward. And I think that's a really comfortable seating arrangement for your primary row of seats, plus a nice proper 3-foot walkway on either side of that. 17-foot width room gets you that. So I'd go for 17 by 21, and then basically the taller you can make it, the better. There's not really a downside to making your room taller, unless it ends up being exactly the same dimension as your width or height, but I don't think you're going to make it 17 feet tall. So if you can do like 10 or 11 feet tall, that's fantastic. So that's what I'd aim for.
So going back to the room mode calculator and everything else, I've never been a huge advocate of caring that much about these. Now, when you have the ability to care, which most people do not, but you do, Mel.
He does.
You have the ability to care. I would at least consider it, but I would throw it all out because of cost or prohibitive cost or some other restrictive factor. Like I wouldn't throw the theater out because I couldn't get the right dimensions.
Oh, sure. Like if you're going to be anywhere within reason, then that's what you go for.
So I don't want you to get hung up on those
Right.
those dimensions is what I'm trying to say. Now that we know, I would more care about thinking about how to properly place my seats, my screen, and my speakers, and most importantly, my subwoofers, than I would care about whether or not I hit those dimensions dead on.
Yeah.
Okay, so worry about where your door is going to be and how that's going to affect your speaker placement and your subwoofer placement, more so than caring about whether or not you're 6 inches off of one dimension or a foot off of one dimension, that sort of thing.
I did want to say one other reason I like 21 feet as a length is because if you did decide to go to a projection setup at some point, or modular displays become affordable and you can go up to a 120-inch screen size, sitting 10 feet from a 120-inch screen, mwah, chef's kiss, beautiful. And that's why I like the idea that if my 83-inch OLED is 2 feet off the front wall, well, when I get a 120-inch screen, I put that on the wall. I don't actually move anything in the room, and the length and everything still works great for a 120-inch screen.
All right. The speakers he already owns are all Martin Logan, but they are the folded ribbon tweeter models, not the electric stats. He's got 7 floor level speakers and 2 ceiling speakers, plus a pair of SVS PC2000 subs. His receiver is a Denon X4200W, so that's a bit older at this point. What would we say is worth adding as far as speakers go? I mean, I think your subs will be fine in here. I think your receiver is fine for right now, but
I mean, he's getting OLED, so he's got all the HDMI 2.1 stuff, and I can see why he stopped at 9 speakers, because that's what his current model goes up to. So assuming at some point he upgrades the receiver, I would assume he's going to upgrade to a model that can do 11 speakers. I don't think you need to go more than 7.2.4. I think that's completely all you need in here. In if you were able to do the dimensions that we talked about and sit at the distances that we talked about and have the distance to the back wall that we talked about, then having 7 floor level speakers makes sense. Having those surround backs makes sense. And then I want to have 4 overhead speakers so that I can do left to right moving of overhead sounds and front to back moving of overhead sounds. 7.
I mean, you could wire for 6. You could wire
6
for
overheads?
6 up there.
Sure.
For 6 overheads.
You could also wire for 2 pairs of side surround speakers so that each row gets its own. So you could end up with as many as 9.2.6 speakers. You could end up with 15 speakers, but I'd probably still do it as 7.2.4 channels.
Right. All right. So any suggestions where to go for theater seats? Okay. So again, I'm not a big fan of the theater seats. We talked about this last week, but so you can go back and listen to that. But basically my rant is theater seats are great for theaters and less great for homes, because you spend more time in a theater, in a home couch, than you do in a theater seat at a movie theater.
Okay.
So I would prefer to have something that has no arms and, the ability to lie down or to recline, not just recline, but to lie down, to snuggle, to cross the couch and stuff like that. So there, Rob always recommends the same place. He's going to recommend it again in just a second here, but I'm going to say, I know that everybody sees these pictures of these home theaters that have theater seats with cup holders and everything else, and they go, "Oh, I want to have that," and then they get it, and after you live with it for a little while, you're like, "I would kill for a regular couch right now," but I spent so much on this thing that I can't get rid of it, so I'm stuck with it until I can justify getting rid of it. I'm telling you, when I justify getting rid of my home theater specific seating, which did have a love seat in the center for my wife and I, which did have a love seat, I got rid of it so fast. I was so happy, and I told my wife, we're never buying that again. We're never going to get that. We're going to get a regular couch, and we'll just make sure every seat reclines on the regular couch.
Okay. I'm going to recommend HT Market. I always recommend HT Market and their HT design seats. You can get them as armless, so if you want to make it a regular couch that doesn't have arms in between each seat, you have that option. And if you get it as a couch configuration where there aren't arms in between each seat, you can get optional arms that fit into the gap between the 2 seats and sit that way, so you can still have it look like there's arms in between each seat, and then remove the arms in between the armless ones. And they have some models that have flat bottom seat cushions, so you can do all the things Tom is talking about and still have ones that are sold as home theater recliners. So I think they are great.
All right. I disagree, but okay.
Even though it meets all your criteria, I still don't like
it. Does. I just glanced at them and went, no, that's not going to work. I just looked over all their little options there. I was like, no, I want a solid back. I want
okay.
solid.
Okay.
I don't want
Solid
individual
back. Okay.
seats
Okay.
that have a flat bottom. I want a solid back so that when my
the solid back is something that is not offered there. Okay.
it's not. I want the solid back so that people can snuggle up together and sit closer together and stuff like that. Not everybody gets their individual seat. We're not segregating people here. So what if he wants to hire not so much a home theater installer, but a system architect, someone to walk him through the whole design and setup process? Anyone we can point him to? I mean, are you not currently talking to those people right now?
Although not quite to the same. I'm sure he wants a lot of back and forth, more time and that.
Yeah, you will have to. You will have to become a donor. You have to donate to the podcast pretty heavily in order for us to start giving you, FaceTime and or phone call access to us.
Sure,
but I'm sure we could work something out. Especially if you have a calling plan that will allow you to call Canada.
Right.
I don't know exactly what he's looking for here as far as the whole design process. I mean, I'm not even sure that I trust I don't know that I would trust any specific installer to have the full knowledge that he may be looking for, especially if he's going to start talking about soundproofing and acoustic treatments. And then, what can an AV installer do for you? They can definitely build you, install your speakers. They can install your screen. They can mount it to the wall. They can hide all the wires. They should be able to patch the drywall and do all that, and install the wall plates and everything else. But are they going to have the full breadth of knowledge that you may want as far as soundproofing and acoustic treatments? Because a lot of these guys don't even believe in acoustic treatments. I'm going to be honest with you. They think
there's one place in Texas who does very popular YouTube videos, and every single one of theirs they have not a acoustic treatment in sight in any of their installations.
I just saw a picture on Facebook that was like Wilson audio speakers. Those things are like $350,000 a pair in the middle of a room that was the size of like my entire house, but just one room, and nothing but brick and stone as far as the eye could see. I was like, that must sound like crap.
Yep.
I mean, $350,000, and I'm being generous. They could cost up to $1 million a pair, these speakers. Sure. And they're in this room that absolutely would do nothing but demolish their sound. So, you're going to have to be really careful when you start talking to people. You're going to have to ask, before you decide on hiring them to help you out, you're going to have to know how to quiz them, if that makes sense, on what knowledge they actually have that will help you. Because, they're in business to make money, and that money comes from selling you stuff. So sitting there and giving you advice may be worth, however many dollars an hour they may want to charge you for it. But if mostly what they do is just say, hey, we've got these great speakers, I'm going to install them. I'm really good at installing these speakers. Well, that's
why he wants more of a system architect as opposed to a installer. I've got 4 places that I feel good about pointing you to talk about various aspects of all of this, and 2 of them are completely free, so there's really no reason not to talk to them. So those first 2 are thesoundproofingcompany.com. I would absolutely go to soundproofingcompany.com and speak with them because when it comes to the how do I physically construct the walls and the floor and the ceiling of this room, which you are talking about, you're building from the ground up, there is no better place to talk to than Soundproofing Company, because you want that. You want the soundproofing and the HVAC side of things, which is tremendously important, and they also deal with that all the time. So they're a ridiculously good resource. I would be angry at you if you don't talk to them, because they don't even charge money for the initial consultations and that. You can hire them to draw up the plans for your actual contractor to construct. That will cost money, which is more than reasonable. But to just talk to them about what you want to do, it's free. So yeah, I'd be angry if you don't. As far as then treating the room, once it's constructed, GIC Acoustics, free advice from GIC Acoustics. So there's no reason not to reach out to them and talk about how you want to acoustically treat the room. As far as design, calibrating, all that, Lion AV, I do think Lion AV is a trusted place that you can go and hire a consultant, which is, I think, what he's really looking for. So I will point you to Lion AV. I would also feel pretty good about pointing to the Screening Room AV. They're in Nevada. So, they're not in Texas, but they will definitely do things remotely when it just comes to design and consultation. And I've talked with their people a little bit, personally, and they seem pretty spot on. They discuss most of the things that I'd be worried about, the red flags that I find all the time with installers that I'm like, I don't know that I would hire this guy unless I'm like the general contractor and telling them what to do. But the Screening Room AV, they're pretty good people over there who know their stuff. So I feel pretty good about, if you just want to talk to them and consult with them, I think they're a good place to go.
Okay. I think we're pretty close to being done here, but let's do one more question.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we're not done with him.
Not quite. You already talked about, because he was just like any other advice off the top of our head, and so you already mentioned some things. So just really quickly, soundproofing the room, that's number one. Already talked about that. Consider the idea of having, a fully finished ceiling, but then having a drop ceiling below that, or like we talked about, essentially a drop ceiling, but now we've got this acoustically transparent drywall look that you could do with that system that we talked about earlier. Scroll back up or scrub back to find where we were talking about that if you just jump directly to this question. But what's great about having a fully finished ceiling, that's your soundproofing. And then when you have the drop ceiling right below that, all of your recessed lights, instead of putting holes in your soundproof ceiling, you put them into your drop ceiling now. You run all your cables up there. You can have HVAC ducts that are below the finished ceiling. Instead of having to put holes in them to have your registers come into the room, they're up there in your drop ceiling. And when you're building from the ground up and you have free reign on how tall this room can be, drop ceiling is a wonderful thing to consider, in my opinion. It makes things so much easier for running the wires that are in your walls and that conduit, so that you can pull new cables if you need to. Also, if you are going for the motorized theater recliners and maybe even going for tactile transducers that we talked about earlier, outlets in the floor. Consider having outlets in the floor where your seating is going to be, or somewhere where it's going to be convenient to plug them in, because you don't want to have this nice 3-foot walkway and then have a power cord draped across it. So if you're going to have a riser for the back row, plugs in the riser for the front row, that type of thing. Consider that is just something to be aware of, that it doesn't go into typical room construction. And consider running an outlet in the ceiling where a projector might go. You're not doing a projector right now, but you might in the future. Although if you have the drop ceiling, then you can run that in the future. But if and when you do have an outlet in your ceiling, do the thing where that outlet doesn't actually connect directly back to your electrical panel. Instead, it runs its Romex back to where all your other AV equipment gets plugged in, and it goes into a male inlet so that you can then connect your projector to a battery backup, because that's still going to be important, even with lasers.
I almost feel like that's like the number one question I would ask an AV installer. Like, how do you properly power a projector?
Yeah.
A home theater projector at the back of the room. And if they don't say what Rob just described, which is run the in-wall Romex extension cord back to your power conditioner / battery backup.
Yeah.
Then you're like, okay, well, it was nice talking to you. See you later. I'm never giving you my money, you nutcase.
If they don't know what a male inlet is, then don't hire them.
Yeah. Lars in Norway. In Lars' setup, he went with a large projection screen nearly wall-to-wall, and his ceiling height is a bit low, too. As a result, all 3 of his front speakers are positioned below the screen and pretty close to the floor. He has them tilted upwards, and it all works quite well, but they are somewhat localizable as being too low. So he knows his Yamaha has a dialogue lift function that utilizes their present speaker positions, but you had to use one of their DSP listening modes for that, right? Yes, you do. Is there a better option for lifting the entire front soundstage? Anything that can be done with Atmos or DTSX or 3D on that front? He has just a little bit of space above his screen where small speakers could go directly above the left, center, and right position. Maybe there's some magic that can be worked with the mini DSP. What do we think?
So here we go. Here's the situation. All the speakers below the screen, but so close. The screen is already so large that they're close to the floor. And he's like, it isn't completely convincing that the voices are coming from the mouths on the screen.
Well, I wonder if it's the voices as much as it is the left and right speakers that are really the problem. It's very often
the left and the right speakers, but they're below his screen too.
Yeah, I would imagine the left and right speakers are more the issue than the voices, which probably look like they're coming from the people, but the sound, the rest of the sounds feel like they're coming a little bit from the floor, because there's no. I mean, unless the sound is directly tied with a visual, which your brain will then snap it to that visual, I think that like the music and stuff like that might sound a little bit low. So is there a way to do this? If you were going to do it, you'd almost have to do it the way that we've talked about doing the fake top middle speakers, which is to have a processor or like an AV receiver that would you would have to have identical speakers below and above your screen, and then take and run mono out from your pre-outs on your receiver to another receiver which would then create a phantom center for those two things. In order to do that, it's not gonna. I don't think that you have space for that. It doesn't sound like you do.
It doesn't sound like it, no.
And putting another speaker up there and trying to do it with another speaker that's not matched with the speaker that's below it is not going to work.
And trying to just put speakers both above and below the screen, which I know has been tried, and trying to like stereo locate height wise doesn't work unless you position yourself horizontally, which is a weird way to watch a movie.
Unless you're sleepy and then you lie down on your couch, which doesn't have arms in it and is an actual couch.
But stereo locating vertically doesn't work for us because our ears are side to side and not top to bottom. So that doesn't work that well. Now, honestly, the Oromatic 3D Upmixer, that's a bit of what it tries to do. Okay, I guess I'm going to invite a whole bunch of criticism and people telling me that I'm absolutely ridiculous. But here's the thing. The Oromatic 3D Upmixer, what does it actually do with those height speakers, the height level speakers that are at a 30-degree elevation angle, and all the positions are like, okay, take your front left and right, go 30 degrees up, there's your front left and right heights. Take your surround speakers, go 30 degrees up, there's your surround left and right height speakers. The sound in the Oromatic 3D Upmixer that comes out of the height level speakers is the same sound as what comes out of your floor level speakers, slightly delayed. I'm sorry to all the people who are like, it's magical, it's so much better than the Dolby Surround Upmixer or the DTS Neuralex Upmixer. Nothing sounds as good as Aura 3D. I'm like, of course that makes sense, because if you were in a really large echoey room, it would be the same sound, slightly delayed. And that's what the Oromatic 3D Upmixer, like, it's nothing more complex than that. People are like, oh, the algorithms, I'm like, it's a delay. It's the same sound, slightly delayed. That's what it is. There's nothing magical about it. Now, that doesn't mean that subjectively and perceptually it doesn't sound pleasing, because it makes it sound like your room is bigger. I think that's what people like. It makes it sound like your room is bigger because they essentially added an echo. As though you had a room big enough to have a slight echo in it. That's what it does. I don't find it very impressive. I'm sorry, all you Oro 3D Upmixer fanatics, and I'm just inviting it. I know I'm inviting it because there's a whole contingent of people who are like, down with Dolby, down with DTS, Oro all the way. It's like, because,
That's all about wanting to be a fan of something different than everybody else, and so you can feel special about yourself. I'm sorry
that's what it is. Here's the experiment. Physically unplug your floor level speakers, listen to just the heights, and if you listen to what the upmixers do, the Dolby Surround Upmixer or the DTS Neuralex Upmixer, if you listen to what they do and put into the height speakers, it is very noticeably different from what is coming out of your floor level speakers if you just physically unplug them. If you physically unplug your floor level speakers and use the Oro 3D Upmixer, it is the same sound, just slightly delayed. Like, the lip sync will be a little bit off if you're still watching the image. It's the same sound. It did nothing but apply a delay. So yeah, I found that humorous. I probably shouldn't have said that, but it's towards the end of the podcast, so maybe not that many people will hear it anyway. But that's what it. But however, that being the case, if you wanted to try I'm just going to put a center speaker physically above and below my screen, the Oro 3D Upmixer works pretty well for that, because that's what it does. It plays the same sound above and below, just one of them slightly delayed over the other.
I mean, the real solution here is to get those your front, left, and right speakers off the floor. Now, I know you said that you don't have a lot of room up front, and I understand that, but you haven't described the rest of your room. Right. So I don't know exactly, what your walkways and everything is looking like, but I mean, so there's two ways you can accomplish this thing that you are trying to accomplish. One is to get the speakers on stands, move them out into the room so they are out of the sight lines, but are still at the right proper ear height. Now, if that's impossible, the second solution is to get a smaller screen so that you
and
can
sit a bit closer to it.
And sit a little bit closer to it, and then put your speakers on stands to either side of the screen. I mean, it doesn't have to be that much smaller. You just have to get them so that, I mean, people are like, oh, you shouldn't put your speakers in the corner. Shut up. All of you, stop saying what you cannot do with your speakers. You can shove speakers in the corner. You can shove them. And if you're like, oh, it's going to compromise the sound. You know what's compromising the sound more? Having them on the ground. Yeah, that's even worse. So,
that is a corner, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's even worse corner. So get a slightly smaller screen and then put them up, or just put them on stands and move them slightly into the room so that they're out of the sight lines, but you're still able to, keep them on stands. That's really, I don't think that the center channel should be the issue. I think the center channel will be just fine if you raise those left and right speakers.
And if it's the case that Lars is similar to our friend Carl, and he's like, there's no way I'd go smaller in screen, but actually, I might go even larger. The option would be to get yourself an acoustically transparent screen instead. Same size, because if it's already physically wall-to-wall, you're not going to actually be able to go physically larger. But if you go acoustically transparent, you bring it closer to you. It's now in front of your speakers. You can, visually, it's even bigger. So, I guess, honestly, the solution that we know will work is to alter your screen in some way.
In some way.
Yeah. It gets smaller so that you have room to put your speakers to the left and right of the screen, and then you'll be able to raise your center a little bit too, and then you just sit closer to keep the same field of view, or you change to acoustically transparent, and if you want to keep the same field of view, you go acoustically transparent, and the screen is actually physically a little smaller than your current screen, so that the field of view stays the same while the screen physically moves closer to you, or if you wanted to go even bigger anyway, there's a good excuse.
There you go. So who do we have left?
We have Errol and Carl, and let's see, Jeff, that's a big picture that I got to scroll past, Caesar, and Junior. That is on the list for this. We got a whole bunch. It's all coming up at the end of this year here, but there we go.
All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com, including Mel. So thank you to our patrons.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. So thank you to our 137 patrons who are doing that. And Mel, thank you for being one of them.
So I want to thank Mitch for talking us up to SVS, as well as Keshaun, Mitch, Mel, Lars, and Junior for the notes of gratitude.
Yeah, Mitch, thanks for checking that box that SVS puts in there. Where'd you hear about us? Heard about it at AVRant. It's one of the options, so thank you for doing that, Mitch. And then the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going, the notes of encouragement from Keshaun, Mitch, Mel, Lars, and Junior. We definitely appreciate those. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
That's right. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.